if you just say, well, do you want me to make dinner? Yeah, and now you don't know what to make, and you're like, I'm a utilitarian. I mean, I just need a protein and a potato, and I'm good. But she's not gonna like that, and blah blah, and all this overthinking that goes on your head. Honestly, people, if you start understanding this attentiveness and how to do this and how to communicate it, it's actually so much less work. It's so much more enjoyable. It's so much more mutual care and concern. Like, it's a game changer. That's why I wanted to do this episode. Hello, and welcome to the Simply Human podcast, the podcast where we explore the common challenges of our shared human experience. I'm Dr. Christina Caro, clinical psychologist.
And I'm Lynskey, leadership and self-trust coach.
Today, we are going to be diving into an issue that's been coming up a lot recently and work that I've been doing primarily with heterosexual couples. But I think this is an issue that if you're in a relationship, any kind of relationship, personal relationship with your children, at work, this is a human behavior that affects the quality of meaningful connection. And that is this idea of attentiveness. And I've been talking to clients about it recently, and it's partly because of my own experience. I've recently have ventured into the dating experience again, and I had this really wonderful experience of being out on a really fun date with someone who was incredibly attentive, to the point where I was a little bit baffled by the whole thing. Yeah, I was like, what is happening? But I noticed that it triggered certain feelings in me. I felt really seen. I felt cared for. I felt special. I felt that it was important. I just felt loved. It was just like, it's really weird to say this, to be like, wow, I don't know that I've experienced this before. But to be honest with you, as I started paying attention to the challenges that were showing up in work I'm doing with individuals and couples, it actually was an aha moment where I realized that the missing experience was this absence of attentiveness. And when I started talking to clients about it, especially the whoever was complaining about not feeling seen or not feeling loved or supported, and I said, I think what you're describing is you have a need to feel like this attention or attentiveness. And it resonated. And then when I talked to male clients, they got a little bit confused because in their mind, they are paying attention. But there's this disconnect between the two on whether or not it's communicated and how it's communicated. So because it's coming up so much, that's partly the purpose of this podcast, is to make sort of learning that seems to be pretty universal available free, especially for people who don't have access to mental health services. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. But before we do that, we're going to ask you, if you've been following our channel and haven't yet hit subscribe, please hit that subscribe button. And we have noticed that our audience is primarily female. So if this resonates for you and you have a partner, please consider sharing with your partner if you think this, in the end, it's going to be helpful in bridging that gap in understanding about what it is that you're looking for.
So Christina, it's very interesting because when we first started and you brought this up to me about that word attentiveness. So what do you mean when you use a word attentiveness in relationship?
It basically comes down to paying attention or being present. It's that act of observing, but I would say what really makes it different, what makes attentiveness different from just observing, it's observing combined with giving a shit. And
love that.
that
makes a lot of sense. Like, you really, it's not just observing, but you give a shit what they're saying or how they're showing up or
how they're showing up, or what or subtleties or small gestures, a sigh, like little things. You observe it, but it's not like, and then you move on to the next thing that you observe, and the next thing you observe, and next thing you observe. You observe it with this addition of giving a shit. And it should be a trigger for curiosity because you don't know what's going on. You just have observed something is up. And then it's acting on that awareness and asking, inquire, a lot of things that we've talked about in the past. So in the past, we've talked on a lot of things about inquiry and how to start difficult conversations, how to create meaningful connection. But I started realizing, you know what? This is the step just before. This is the thing that has to be cultivated for those things to get triggered. So we're backing up the truck a little bit today to just really hone in on this behavior of attentiveness.
You know, I was also thinking about when you first date. I do think I was more attentive when I first date because I'm like, it's in discovery. And I realize now in my own relationship, I think I make assumptions thinking that I know Mark, my husband.
Yeah.
And so I'm not as attentive probably as I was before. So this is when you bring that up. I'm like, that's the interesting part that triggered it. So when you mention that women often say they don't feel loved or supported while their partners feel like they can never ever get it right. What's really going on beneath these frustrations?
Yeah, so this is what I think I've been seeing is a disconnect. So I will hear complaints like, I don't feel seen, my partner doesn't care about me. I'm coming home and I have all this stress, and then I have to go cook, and then the kids are doing this, and they're just sitting on their phone. Or I ask a question and they don't answer and they just wander off. Okay. These are all the opposite of what attentiveness is. Now, John and Julie Gottman are well-known researchers on marriage and relationships, and they are the only people who've done what we call a longitudinal study. And that is you study people and then you follow them over time. It's very expensive. It's very difficult to do. It's why we don't have a lot of longitudinal studies, but it gives you really good data because you have your theories on what you observe on the data you gather. But unless you're watching, like, how does this really play out? You don't really know. You can only have probabilities. So they have done these longitudinal studies. And one of the things that they identified in successful relationships is responsiveness to bids for connection. And that can be something like you're at the table with your partner and it's breakfast and you're both reading the paper, and one person sees an article and they say, hey, listen to this, and they share the article. Now, if the partner turns towards the bid, they would put their paper down and say, oh, what else did it say? They would be engaged with it. Or if they don't turn towards the bid, they just keep reading their paper.
Or play their game on the phone.
Yeah, or they're like distracted.
They're not
right?
attentive, exactly.
Right. And the frequency and the consistency of those turning towards behaviors is one of the indicators of marriages that will succeed. So attentiveness is a component, is related to that, because you have to first be attentive and then you make the choice to turn towards or not to turn towards. But it does require attentiveness first. Attentiveness is about really being present. And so when your partner isn't attentive, that's this feeling of, I don't feel seen, I don't feel loved, that I don't feel supported. And a bid can be something like a sigh. You've had a really hard day and something on your mind and you have a big sigh. Does your partner even notice? An attentive partner does notice. So it's not just about listening, paying attention, active listening. It isn't always about words. It's about what state where's your partner at? What's their mood? What's going on with them? What are they dealing with in that moment? Do they need help? It could be behaviors, it could be words, it could be gestures, it could be all kinds of things. And whether or not you're present to or not is the gauge on whether or not you are being attentive to those cues. Okay, so then on the other side of it, you have the partner who, when I talk to the male clients, it's not that they're not noticing. They do notice quite a bit. And often what I find is there is a lot of thinking and analyzing, and that tends to influence the decision. Like, they might observe, oh, she seems really stressed out, but then they tend to wait to be like, well, I guess she'll let me know if she needs some help. They don't necessarily always jump in to rescue. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. They're not codepending, but there's a balance where there's the observation is often there. It's just that next thing, like, what do I do with that observation? And they'll start hearing the complaints, which won't resonate because what they're hearing is, I don't feel loved. You don't care about me. You don't support me. And from their perspective, it's like, I love you. I totally care about you. I want to be supportive. Just tell me what you want. Now, part of the problem, like, there's just gender dynamics in terms of if you watch male friendships, they're very direct with each other. If I need to borrow your ladder, I just ask you, can I borrow your ladder? I don't like go work on something and struggle on a makeshift ladder, hoping my neighbor will see and say, hey, do you need a ladder? No, I need a ladder. I go ask, like, hey, can I use your ladder? Like, just, it's very direct that way. So there's a little bit of, and that's not always the same with female relationships. I would get in trouble a lot with, like, well, you should have just known. So there's a little bit of gender differences. It's not right or wrong, just these differences. So there's a disconnect. But what I also see that's happened is, like you said, Karen, in the beginning of a relationship, there may have been a high level of attentiveness.
Yeah.
And then if what's happened is one partner is getting corrected a lot, or they're not quite getting it right and they're feeling they're getting criticism a lot, what happens is then it's not that they don't love the person, but they retreat to be more passive. Like, well, let me play it safe and let me just wait for them to ask for what they exactly want, so I know exactly what it is and I can get a win. And so I will hear, especially if it's in the middle of a couple session, well, why doesn't she just tell me what she wants? Like, I'll do it. And what they don't understand is that there's a cognitive and emotional toll to that.
I never thought about that emotional cost of retreating in that passive compliance type of arena. So what's that? What is that emotional cost of that?
No, there's an emotional cost on both sides, actually. What I hear from women is, and I certainly have experienced myself, is when you find yourself in a position of now having to ask for every little thing,
you get frustrated
every single time. Hey, it's trash day. Can you take out the trash? Hey, I'm working late. Can you start dinner? Like, every time I work late, I have to ask you to start dinner. And like, there's never sort of a learning of, oh, she's working late, attentiveness. Let me offer to start dinner. So it puts a cognitive demand on the person who has to make the requests all the time. And women will get a state of exhaustion. And then they also won't feel emotionally safe, because the feeling, I hear this all the time, is I don't feel like they have my back. Okay? And that's when we're getting to really, like, they're starting not to trust their partner. They're really not feeling cared for because they're having to ask and ask and ask. And what they're perceiving of okay, fine, like a reluctant compliant. But then the emotional cost on the other side, and I've always say this to women, and I've checked it with men, and I'll say, listen, your partner, believe it or not, wants to be a hero. Like, what's nothing more to be a hero? But when they feel they're failing all the time and they're getting in trouble all the time, that elevates anxiety. That elevates, like, I don't want to be criticized. It's painful. No, it's painful for women. It's painful for men to feel criticized all the time. And then when you have a drive to be a hero and you feel like you're a failed hero all the time, that's an emotional cost. And that is going to trigger moving to a more of a safer stance, which is, I'm going to wait till they tell me exactly what it is and how they want it and what flavor and at what time and what temperature. Like, give me all the criteria and I will do everything on the list. And even then they say, and I'm still going to get criticized.
So you're not going to win either way. So just
yeah. And that's just a really sad state that it devolves into. And I think that we can climb out of this with a better understanding about attentiveness, because this really isn't about mind reading. It isn't about an expectation that men should observe and then be able to decipher all of that and then execute it perfectly without there being anything coming from the person in need. But it's also not the other extreme of, I have to give you an entire, multi-part list in order to get a need met.
So So if you were to give me some examples of what it would look like, can you just share some of those of someone truly being attentive?
Yeah. So remember, attentiveness is observing plus giving a shit. So you don't have to know what the answer is to resolve. So say your partner, you observe they look frazzled. You know, they've been wandering from one room to the other looking for their keys and they can't find it. And you're seeing that frustration. Right. And some partners will be like, ooh, wide berth. Like, I don't want to say anything to her. She's going to explode at me at any moment because you don't know. It's like, I don't even know how to guess what's going on with her. So, but observing with giving a shit is to notice and say, hey, ho, let's slow down a minute. What's going on? Do you need something? It's okay to ask. Okay.
Exactly.
There's a difference in saying, tell me what you want and do you need something? Because I want to help you. One of is, I'm showing up for you and let me know how is important to you. The other one is, I don't even want to put energy into figuring it out, but if you figure it out and tell me, I'll do it. That doesn't feel cared for. That doesn't feel that I'm supported or loved. That just sounds like I am just a checklist. And this is why I said it devolves into this transactional dynamic of giving checklists and then checking off lists. What's really funny, Karen, is when you and I worked at CSC, I was on an assignment between our company and another one. And this was exactly what the conflict was. The company that had hired us, their complaint was our people weren't attentive.
Oh, interesting.
They were doing the tasks and they literally said, I feel like I'm just a checklist.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they care. And it was his attentiveness. So like I said, I'm talking in the relationship realm, but this happened in two defense contractors who build military weapons. Yeah, I just remembered that.
I love that difference between when you are truly paying attention, the person doesn't feel like they're on a checklist. I love that. It's like, get it done. Like, just answer the question.
You're not a to-do. You're not a to-do. Right. It's not coming out of to-do. It's coming that I care. So like what happened to me, again, you're right, Karen, when you're on first dates, second dates, whatnot, we tend to both have high levels of attentiveness. And it's exactly what you said, that familiarity hasn't settled in yet. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot more that's unknown. So we're paying more attention because we're trying to get to know the person.
Yeah.
And for me, it was just like I was learning volleyball and I was running to get the ball on the sand. And he was like, whoa, wait. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to twist.
That's cool.
So again, just like thinking about how is she feeling? So it was empathy. He was putting himself in my shoes or trying to put himself in my shoes and then attend to that. So that's why I was like, what is this odd behavior?
But it's interesting because what you just said too, it actually creates that emotional safety in a relationship, which is so critical.
Yeah,
right?
It absolutely
feel love
does.
and
you have my back.
Emotionally, exactly. That's the emotional.
You're paying attention. Being attentive is. I remember being at somebody's, I think it was a wedding reception, and people were standing in a circle, and my husband at the time. Like he just came and stood right in front of me. Like these were his friends, and he stood right in front of me. And his best friend observed and gave a shit. And he went over, got a chair, pulled it, and made a space for me, and then opened up a chair for me to sit down.
Aww.
And then I think my ex also kind of stepped in front of his wife, and then his best friend noticed, and then he went and pulled her out. And so that she would continue to be part of the group. So one totally oblivious, not attentive. And Brian was lovely, just wonderfully attentive to what was happening and then acting, giving a shit enough to act out. Didn't make a big deal of it, just corrected the situation. Or my buddy came out to visit and we went fishing. And, when you fish, you fish, Karen, but we had, beach chairs and fishing poles and tackle box. And I was going to pick it up and he saw my hands were full and he's like, give that to me, and I was just like, I'm so used to doing things on my own.
Mm.
And he was like, "Hey, give that to me. I've got it. I've got it." Again, that gives you that someone's got my back feeling, that sense
Yeah.
of emotional safety, checking in on each other. I just came back from a trip and I was talking to a friend immediately. Do you need a ride to the airport? That's,
Mm.
again, he didn't read my mind, but he knew I was going on a trip. He knows getting to the airport is a component of going on a
And
trip.
he asked,
And he asked,
which is inquiry. He asked.
yeah, so this is what it looks like. You're saying, what does attentiveness look
Mm.
like? It is observing and then giving a shit. And then a lot of times it's asking, do you need X? Are you okay? Hey, do you need to sit down for a moment? Are you getting hot? Can you see? Is there something I can do for you? Just a gesture of care. That's what it looks like. That's what it sounds like.
Now, I also know, because you're not only working with couples, but also I've known you also work with within organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So, give me an example from that realm of the role of attentiveness and how that would look.
Yeah, we had this intervention, is what it's called when you're doing an organization development. It was this A to Z, like each letter was a skill. And the very first one was ask. And it was mid-level managers, defense contractors, a bunch of crusty old sailors. And they were mid-level, right? So we had an employee retention issue. So this was an intervention to find out what was going on and how can we retain good employees. And so ask was really about this attentiveness, check in on your people, see how they're doing, pay attention. And it was so interesting how much anxiety was instantly triggered by these mid-level managers. They were just like, "Oh, I don't ask. I don't want to ask. Like, what if they need something I can't give them?" So I think in personal relationships and work relationships, this desire to, well, if I ask and now I cannot fulfill the need, I feel like a schmuck. And so
Oh
I'm just going to
gosh.
avoid and I'm just keep my door. Well, I told them I have an open door policy. Like if they want something, they can come ask me. Is that attentiveness?
No, it's not.
It's attentive to maybe a request, but it isn't proactively being attentive. It's still that passive. If you ask me, maybe I'll get around to doing it. So it does show up in a work environment. It's when you are paying attention to the people who work for you and you give a shit.
Yeah, so you and I are talking about what I plan to do, because Christina will be on travel. So my next podcast that we're going to put up is me delving into this whole attentiveness into the workplace and give more examples of that. So
Yeah,
that's
that
what I
would be
want to do.
really good.
Yeah. This is great because I understand now, and I hope our listeners have too, what you mean by attentiveness and what it looks like. For someone who is listening, who actually is resonating with all of this, and who maybe feel stuck in that loop, what is the first small step towards becoming more attentive?
Well, I think it's two things, right? It's not just about becoming more attentive, it's knowing how to ask for attentiveness. Instead of saying, why don't you support me? Or instead of it just being criticism, you don't support me, you don't love me, I don't feel loved, you don't have my back, right? Those are all statements of judgment.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it just won't resonate. You tell your partner who maybe you've been married to, who does love you, and you say, I don't think you love me. They honestly don't know what to do with that. If they do love you, you're not giving them actionable information that's specific enough.
I love that.
This is why it occurred to me that really understanding what's beneath that, this experience of what it feels like when you have attentiveness in the relationship, observing, giving a shit, and executing on that observation, you feel supported, you feel safe, you feel that they have your back, you feel cared for, even if it's not perfect. That's the whole thing that's key. The attentiveness in some sense is like 60% of it, 60, 70% of it. Most of us want to know that we're cared for. We understand that our partners aren't perfect and they can't execute all the times exactly as we might need it. But just the willingness to want to, that attentiveness and that giving a shit and wanting to try actually is a lot of deposits into the bank account of goodwill. So learning how to ask instead of a complaint and saying, I feel unsupported, you could maybe start having this conversation about attentiveness. You could start by sharing this episode and just say, what I'm looking for is knowing that you are actually paying attention to just me, like how I'm feeling, what's going on in my life, like where am I at on any, when we're together, where am I at? Because most men are tactical and they are, they have that hunter brain. They're actually generally pretty good at noticing all kinds of stuff. So that's the first one, because most of them will say, well, I do notice. Okay, so that's great. If we already have that, I do notice. And just say, how can you let me know that you are noticing? Because that's what's getting lost in translation. So it might be something like just saying, hey, you might have to coach. You might just say, what I would like to hear when I'm working late and you observe that I'm working late and you've noticed that every time I work late, it's really helpful when you make dinner. Well, when I say I have to stay late and you observe that and you care about it, then a suggestion, you only have to suggest, hey, I could make dinner. Would that be helpful? Now I want you to hear how I said that. I can make dinner.
Would that be helpful?
Would that be helpful? Not, right. Well, do you want me to make dinner?
Oh, yeah.
Do you hear the difference in that, Karen? Yes. Like, how would you, do you hear the difference in that?
Because I think it's more like, one, I feel like you're saying, I will make dinner. Would that help?
Yes.
Right? Which is, you're doing the
action. I'm
action.
Take this action.
Would that help? Yeah. Instead of just saying, do you want me to again? It's almost like, do I have to tell you again? It's like, that's, I hear the difference. Like,
it sounds like a cop-out. It sounds like, yeah, I don't really want to do it.
No.
Or even if like, okay, well, do you want me to make dinner? And sometimes the reason they'll say that is maybe they did make dinner in the past and then the partner came home and said, oh, that's what you made for dinner, and they criticized it.
But I noticed the point of it is you're noticing, because that person is explaining what they're noticing first.
But what they're doing is saying, they're being very explicit. I can make dinner. So the person who is offering is owning their own capability of what they are able to do. The only thing they're checking is that of value to you?
Yeah. Would that help?
That of value to you?
Yes. Yes.
Not when you just say, do you want me to? You're not owning anything that you're capable of. You're not actually indicating that you are willing to take initiative. You're actually saying, I won't do anything unless you ask me to do the thing. That's, do you want me to make dinner versus I can totally make dinner for you, babe. Is that going to be helpful? That is like, that feels
validated and heard. I feel validated and heard instead of it just being,
yeah. And you see
just
how
one more thing on that person's I never saw it.
You see how subtle that is, but what a big impact it has.
And it's so funny because one of the episodes we did, which I never understood. This is why Christina asked me if I understood, because I remember we did this thing about, can you do this versus are you willing to? And how big of a difference words matter. And so I want to pick that up again, where words do matter. The sequence of the words matter. And I think even when you're explaining to that person, what it would look like, when you give that example, it was really great, because then you're training them. I don't want to say training, but sharing them how it should be said. And I think that's a great example you could use with your partner.
And so instead of just saying, if you're the person looking for the attentiveness and saying, well, just don't keep asking me what to do, blah, blah, blah. That is very confusing, because maybe there does need to be an inquiry in there. That isn't where the problem is. It's not the asking that's the problem. It's what you're asking about. So this part is more directed to the person trying to be attentive. Okay. You're observing, you have your observations. And so now it's about being proactive. Do something with your observations that's connected to giving a shit. Because you know what your partner observes? The things you care about, you're proactive about. The things that she cares about, you're passive about. That's why she feels that you don't care. That's why she interprets your behavior as selfish, because you're very proactive on the things that you know you
Care
need.
about.
Well, because
Yeah.
it's safe. No one's going to criticize you. You're not going to
Mm.
criticize yourself taking care of what you need. So, it kind of makes sense. So what you're trying to do is like, you have an observation, share the observation, think about what action you can take initiative on that might address it. And guess what? You don't have to be right. You do not have to be right. You just take your best guess on what action from what you've learned in the past, and then say, I can do X. Let me do X. Would that be helpful? The question is this of value to you?
I love that.
And that you're more likely to get a response. If it's not, will be more thoughtful, and it's more likely to be, you know what, you don't need to make dinner. Like, what if we just do takeout? So they will tweak it, but that's going to feel different. That's not going to feel like criticism. That's going to feel like collaborating, and let's come up with this problem together and teamwork.
Right.
If you just say, well, do you want me to make dinner? Yeah, and now you don't know what to make, and you're like, I'm a utilitarian. I mean, I just need a protein and a potato, and I'm good, but she's not gonna like that, and blah blah, and all this overthinking that goes on your head. Honestly, people, if you start understanding this attentiveness and how to do this and how to communicate it, it's actually so much less work. It's so much more enjoyable. It's so much more of mutual care and concern. Like, it's a game changer. That's why I wanted to do this episode.
I love it. I love this episode. So I am so excited about this because I've just learned so much again. This is when we go into this whole thing where I ask questions and Christina gives us her thoughts. And my mind is blown again. I've learned so much from this one. I think Mark's going to see a different side of me today and moving forward.
Because you're working attentiveness, or
yes, I think I have to be more attentiveness and also request. I think it's both sides. Honestly, I don't think it's necessarily one side. I think it's both sides. So it's interesting, and so I'm really excited.
I would say this, Karen. I would say this: if you want to practice, if people are looking for a way to practice, if you're a pet owner. Particularly, I don't know about, I'm not a cat owner. I can't speak to cats, but I can speak to dogs. I'm a dog mom. And because dogs can't use language, we tend to cultivate a nonverbal attentiveness because we have to interpret, especially my dog, she didn't make a sound. Like, hers was just a hard stare, and it was so nuanced that I had to learn what she was trying to communicate, or if she's getting up or moving, and just learn how to read subtle cues. And it was really cultivated being a dog mom for 28 years. I've had 2 special needs dogs, and I had to learn to be really attentive. Have you been a parent and you were a primary caretaker of a baby, of a newborn? Yeah, you got a lot of practice on attentiveness. So, and if you're a gardener, especially if you're a gardener in a challenging place, like I used to be a gardener in Virginia, where it's very humid and I have to deal with things like aphids, and aphids bring mold and black spot. And I was a rose gardener. I just you're constantly paying attention to your garden and what it needs, and are the leaves curling? You practice attentiveness there. If you play sports that require you to be present, you're practicing attentiveness. So there's lots and lots and lots of places to practice this. I think what happens is just to understand, to bring this into the realm of relationships, to really get the power of it, to really improve the quality of meaningful connection.
Yeah, and I think every relationship could use a tune-up on this area, honestly. Honestly, I think so. And so I just want to thank you for this idea, bringing this up. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, you listeners, because all of us could actually bring a lot of attentiveness to whatever relationship we have. That's what brings us together as a community. So we look forward to hearing about your comments, or we love for you to just send us an email at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com.
And then, folks, until next time, don't forget, stay curious, stay kind, and I will see you in about a month, and Karen will see you in a couple of weeks. So we'll see y'all later. Bye.
Bye, y'all.